So today I would like to talk about one of the earliest Montandon watchmakers, David Montandon, who was born in 1732. He made watches together with Yersin, and the watches are signed Yersin et Montandon à Paris. David Montandon, we do not know when he died. He appears to have disappeared around the time of the French Revolution, after which we do not hear of him. It's not clear whether he, like other Swiss watchmakers, went back to Neuchâtel during the Troubles, or if he stayed, or if indeed he succumbed during the Revolution or the subsequent Napoleonic Wars. Now, David Montandon, his actual name is David-François, and he was born to the so-called Jonas-Louis Montandon, who was a doctor who was rather successful in his treatments of people. We do find that David had made service in La Brevine in 1750. By 1755, he was selected as part of an apprenticeship, and as a matter of fact, eventually he would join with 39 other people. There were 40 watchmakers that went to Paris, and it was as a part of a plan by a watchmaker community in Paris to pay quite heavy taxes by the French king that were levied at that time. And he was part of this group that was selected, and an exception was made for them in their apprenticeship towards mastery. But at any rate, by 1770, he did receive his mastership in watchmaking. Now, he was also an orfèvre, or goldsmith, and we actually know that when he ascended to his first apprenticeship in 1755, that he also had joined a local lodge, Masonic lodge, with several other gold makers in Locle, and this lodge was called the Three Flaming Stars, or to the Three Flaming Stars, aux trois étoiles flamboyantes, excuse me. And amongst his other siblings can be found other goldsmiths. For example, his brother Moses Henri, he also worked as a goldsmith, also in business as a négociant, and he even performed certain medical procedures, apparently as a doctor. It's not clear to what level. However, he died by 1763. Another brother of his, Jonas Daniel, was a pasteur or a preacher in the Traverse community. The other brother, Abraham, was a notary and a locksmith. And it's interesting because at this time, locksmiths also had begun to participate in watchmaking, making various parts for the watches. But Abram would have been very instrumental in the genealogical research of the Montandon family history, and his research is very predominant in Frederick J. Montandon's Les Montandons. The last brother, Jean-Louis, we know very little of. Whether he was involved in the watchmaking or not, it's not clear. Of David-François' watches and clocks, only 3 examples are known to exist. The first is an astronomical calendar clock, which is a mantelpiece, and it is made of bronze, and it's a really incredible piece, very rare. We do not know of any other clocks that have survived, also signed Yersin et Montandon. This could have been made between the late 1770s and the early to mid 1880s, but it's on a classical mythological basis because of the subject matter. It's sort of a statue clock. Now the other, probably the most well-known piece by David and Yersin was a gold montre ronde, a round pocket watch. This is actually located at the Museum of the Louvre, and until recently it was the only known David-François pocket watch. Now, I should say a little bit about the person that he worked with. Now this Yersin, his father had been in business in Paris previously as a négociant. However, this is most likely the individual that we're speaking of is Jonas-Louis Yersin. Now, the Louvre information records him in the opposite order as Louis Jonas. However, the genealogical information that we have appears to be related to Jonas-Louis. Now, his partner, Yersin, received his mastership in 1778. Therefore, he would have been the junior member of this partnership. But anyways, the Louvre piece is extremely well made. It's practically in immaculate condition, and it was received by the Louvre in 1935 as part of the Olivier collection, when the Olivier, I believe he was the last remaining member of that family, died and willed it to the museum, or it was acquired by the museum. With last few words about Yersin, he appears to have left Paris during the French Revolution, or perhaps at some point in the course of it. At any rate, we later, after 1800, between 1800 and 1820, he seems to have moved back to Fleurier in the Traverse Valley, and we see watches by Yersin et Fils. So he and his son were carrying on the watch business, and after that time we don't really hear anything about him, but the son probably carried on with Lequin later on during the 19th century. Now, let us return to the story of David-François, because very little about his biography is known. We do know that he was a Mason, a Freemason, and that was pretty common with these specialized trades such as watchmakers, goldsmiths, silversmiths, and this type of thing, especially in the 18th century during the Age of Enlightenment. As a side note, the picture behind me is François Boucher, and it's also from this period. This is an original Boucher. But it is part of the atmosphere or culture that they found themselves in. This development towards reason and enlightenment, and Freemasonry was also part and parcel of this whole development at that time. But considering the biographical information on David-François, we have very little. However, in the book here, which was compiled by local historians from the village of Château, which is southwest of Paris, sort of to the northwest of Versailles, there is an event which is related, and it's very interesting because now David's brothers were hunters, avid hunters, and one license or an application for a hunting license can actually be found in the archives at Neuchâtel. So he probably had hunted before with his brothers as well, but in this book there's a story related about a group of hunters which included the watchmaker Montandon from Paris, and at this time David-François is the sole Montandon watchmaker in Paris. So we're pretty sure that this is relating to him. Now, this was in 1776, and apparently during the hunt, and this was on a Sunday in September of 1776, the party went, and it included his assistant or apprentice, Lacote, who was the son of a guard, and apparently his family had been a local from the chateau area, and in their party included another friend of David's and an ouvrier, probably somebody also from the watch shop that he had in Paris. However, he was training this apprentice. The apprentice was with him, Lacote, and during the hunt, a murder happened. Apparently, one of the young boys who beats the bushes to scare the pheasants and the small game out was killed, accidentally shot in the head, and his name was Jean-Antoine Levaneux. So this 16-year-old boy was found murdered, and the area of this hunt is almost an island. The bridge to this area had been cut, which was a routine situation that it was frequently out, and so there was basically no way to get in or out. It was a cul-de-sac, and when the officials came to investigate this murder, our watchmaker Montandon and his assistant Lacote were arrested and taken to prison for questioning. Now, it is to be assumed that he was cleared of this crime since by 1780 his first child Rose was born, and a few years later, by 1783-84, Henriette, the second daughter. So it is most likely that he was cleared. Perhaps the actual wrongdoer was indicated by the gendarmes at the time. Now, I would like to get to the heart of the matter of today's presentation. The oldest Montandon piece that we know of happens to be a silver Quantième. It's a calendar watch. It's the item we see here, and this is probably dating between 1778 and 1789, and when we inspect the movement, it is signed Yersin Montandon. There are various different markings, maker's marks, one of which is FHD, and this may be associated with the group of watchmakers that David-François was involved in, and possibly Yersin, who would have followed later from Switzerland. And there is another inscription in here, which says Crotte, Montarlot, 1895, and this is immaculately written in later. This etching must indicate the ownership at almost when this was, at least a century old. This Monsieur Crotte from Montarlot came to possess this watch, and there is a huge number of this family Crotte, which we find mainly farmers in the village Montarlot-les-Champlites, which is actually fairly close to Switzerland. It's in Haute-Saône and on the periphery of Burgundy, but north of Dijon. So more than likely, this piece sat there for at least a century, perhaps two. But the piece is actually in quite good shape internally. We do see that the piece is missing the third needle. Now, that hand would have been very skinny and long, and it would have touched the red numbers on the edge of the dial that go from 1 to 31, the calendar days. That is exactly why this watch is called a Quantième. It can tell you what day of the month it is. So that is an additional complication. But it does appear that this watch is the oldest. The serial number in this watch is 1447, which is significantly lower than the watch that is retained at the Louvre collection, which is in the mid-2000s, and is also dated to around 1789, 1790. But so we're probably looking at a piece here from the mid-1780s, but it could be as early as 1778, since we know that Yersin received his master's at that time. Now, let us take a closer look at the movement. Now we'll provide close-ups of this. This is an absolutely ultra-rare item as far as Montandon watches go. Montandon watches are in general highly rare, but this piece in particular, it must be practically, if not unique, ultra rare, which makes this very interesting. But as I said previously, this is the oldest recorded Montandon watch, so this is a very special object. And in the watch catalog that I have compiled, it's object number 1. So, and that's from approximately 350 objects. But this would make, if we would have more pieces from the earlier masters, there are masters before David Montandon. There were several Abrams, and they were both goldsmiths like himself and pendulers, pendulum clockmakers. However, Abraham Louis was also known to be making watch cases. So some of their pieces could be out there somewhere in a private collection. They have not been unearthed at this point. Another old master, not as old as David, but practically the same time, is Balthasar Montandon, and here we have a cadran, or dial, which this dates slightly after David Montandon's pieces. This is circa 1790 to 1800, and it certainly makes it among the earliest of the Montandon objects that we know of in watch history. It's possibly in the 3rd place, 4th place, if you count the other Yersin Montandon pieces. So after that, we don't really see watches until the 1820s, 1820s. But these pieces are extremely rare. They can be counted on one hand. So it gives a little bit of thought with regards to these early makers and the rarity and the need to document them for posterity's sake. That's pretty much the story of the earliest Montandon watch and its maker and some of the people that surrounded the story. So just a note for the record. Thanks for your attention.